My mother announced at brunch, "We're rewriting the trust. You don't deserve a penny." My siblings cheered. I didn't argue, just contacted the original trustee to enforce the hidden clause. Their faces dropped when the lawyer arrived with the real documents. I, 34M, sat at the mahogany dining table in my mother's estate, surrounded by the people who were supposed to be my family. The Sunday brunch had become a monthly ritual after my father died 3 years ago, though I'd started to dread them. My two siblings sat across from me, already exchanging knowing looks before the main course even arrived. My mother presided at the head of the table like a queen holding court, her perfectly styled hair and designer outfits speaking to the wealth she'd grown accustomed to managing since Dad's passing. The conversation started innocently enough. Small talk about weather and local gossip. Then my mother cleared her throat in that particular way that meant something important was coming. She set down her fork with deliberate precision and looked directly at me. She announced that she'd been thinking long and hard about the family trust, the one my father had established before his death, the one that was supposed to secure all of our futures. Then came the words that would change everything. She told me I didn't deserve a penny of it. My brother laughed first, a sharp bark of amusement that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. My sister joined in, clapping her hands together like this was the best news she'd heard all year. They told her it was about time someone said it out loud. My mother continued, explaining how they'd been meeting with lawyers, how they'd found ways to restructure everything, how the new arrangement would divide my third between the two of them. She said I'd made choices that dishonored the family, that my lifestyle didn't align with their values, that I'd essentially excommunicated myself through my actions. I sat there, fork hovering over my eggs Benedict, and said nothing. The accusations weren't new. For the past 3 years, they'd been building a narrative about me that was so far from the truth, it would have been laughable if it wasn't so calculated. After Dad died, I'd taken a step back from the family business to pursue environmental law. I'd started working with nonprofits, taking cases that mattered to me even when they didn't pay well. My mother saw this as a betrayal of my father's legacy. My siblings saw it as an opportunity. They'd stayed close to her, moved into the roles Dad had left vacant, whispered in her ear during her grief. They told her I was ungrateful, that I'd abandoned the family when we needed to stick together. They conveniently forgot to mention how they'd started liquidating company assets, taking executive bonuses, and generally treating Dad's life's work like their personal piggy bank. But I was the problem because I chose a different path. My mother finished her speech by saying the lawyers would be finalizing everything within the month. My sister added that perhaps this would teach me some humility. My brother suggested I might need to actually work for a living now, as if I hadn't been working 80-hour weeks at the nonprofit. I looked at each of them, these people who shared my blood but had become strangers, and simply nodded. I told them I understood, that it was their decision to make, and excused myself from the table. The drive home was a blur. My wife asked me what happened the moment I walked through the door. She could read my face like a book after 10 years of marriage. I told her everything, and she immediately started talking about lawyers and fighting back. But I asked her to trust me, told her I needed to make a phone call first. That evening, I sat in my home office and dialed a number I'd kept in my phone but never needed to use. The man who answered was my father's oldest friend and his original attorney, the one who drafted the trust documents 25 years ago. He'd retired from active practice but had remained a trustee, a fact my mother and siblings seemed to have forgotten in their rush to rewrite everything. I asked him if we could meet, told him what had happened at brunch. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then something that sounded like a chuckle. He told me to come to his office the next morning, that there were things I needed to know, things my father had made him promise not to reveal unless certain circumstances arose. The meeting the next day changed everything. The old lawyer sat across from me in his wood-paneled office, surrounded by law books and framed photos from a long career. He pulled out a file so thick it required 2 hands to lift, marked with my father's name and dated from before I was born. He explained that my father had been a cautious man, someone who'd built his fortune from nothing and understood how money could corrupt even the people you loved most. The trust my family knew about was real, but it was only part of the story. My father had created a second trust, one with ironclad protections and a clause that most people would call paranoid. If anyone attempted to remove or disinherit one of the beneficiaries without unanimous consent of all parties including the trustee, the entire structure would collapse and revert to the original terms. More than that, there was a provision my father had insisted on, one that he'd told the lawyer was insurance against exactly this kind of family implosion. The provision stated that if any beneficiary was removed through coercion, manipulation, or fraud, and if the trustee determined that beneficiary had remained true to the values my father held dear, that beneficiary would receive full control of the entire trust. The other parties would receive a one-time payment of $50,000 each and nothing more. The lawyer looked at me over his reading glasses and asked if I understood what this meant. I did. He asked if I wanted him to enforce it. I thought about my mother, about my siblings, about the years of manipulation and lies. I thought about my father, who must have seen this possibility decades ago, who must have known that money could turn his family against each other. Then I thought about the nonprofit I worked for, about the communities we served, about the real difference we could make with proper funding. I told him yes. The lawyer said he'd need a few days to prepare the documentation and notify all parties. He suggested I not attend the notification meeting, that it would be better if he handled it professionally. I agreed. The next 72 hours were some of the longest of my life. My wife and I talked through every scenario, every possible outcome. She worried about burning bridges that might never be rebuilt. I worried I'd already lost my family years ago and was only now acknowledging it. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at my mother's estate. The lawyer had informed them it was a routine trust review, nothing urgent, but necessary given recent discussions about restructuring. My mother had apparently been thrilled, thinking this was the final step in cutting me out. She'd even invited her new lawyers to attend, ready to push through the changes. I wasn't there, but the lawyer called me immediately afterward and described the scene. He'd arrived with his briefcase and a younger associate, both in formal suits that communicated serious business. My mother had greeted them warmly, offered drinks, settled everyone in the formal living room. Her lawyers sat beside her like guards. My siblings flanked her other side. Everyone was smiling, confident, ready to finalize their victory. The old lawyer opened his briefcase and removed the original trust documents. He explained that before they proceeded with any restructuring, there were some foundational elements they needed to review. He walked them through the basic terms they all knew, then started introducing provisions they'd apparently never bothered to read carefully. My mother's smile began to falter around the 10-minute mark. Her lawyers started flipping through their own copies, frowning. Then he reached the key clause, the protection provision, the anti-manipulation safeguard. He read it aloud, slowly, making sure every word landed. My sister later told me the room went completely silent. My mother asked what exactly he was saying. He explained in simple terms that their attempted restructuring had triggered the protection clause, that he, as trustee, had reviewed the situation and determined I'd been targeted unfairly, that effective immediately, the entire trust was reverting to original terms with one significant change. I was now the primary beneficiary with full control. They would each receive $50,000 as a final distribution. The trust was worth approximately $47 million. My brother apparently stood up so fast he knocked over a side table. He started yelling about lawyers and lawsuits and how this couldn't be legal. The old lawyer calmly explained that every word was legally binding, that my father had paid top dollar for ironclad language, and that any attempt to contest it would trigger a clause that reduced their final payment to $1 each. My mother's lawyers were already reviewing the documents, and I was told their faces went pale as they confirmed everything. My sister started crying, asking how I could do this to them. My mother just sat there, frozen, staring at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. The old lawyer stood, told them they had 30 days to contest through proper channels if they wished, though he strongly advised against it, and then he left. The whole meeting took less than an hour. He called me from his car, said he'd never seen anything quite like it in 50 years of practice. He told me my father would be proud, that I'd honored everything the old man stood for. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in my home office shaking. It was done. My family was gone, but I'd won. The fallout was immediate and explosive. My mother called me within an hour, screaming so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She told me I was a thief, a manipulator, that I destroyed the family. She said my father would be ashamed of me, that I'd twisted his words and corrupted his intentions. I let her finish, then quietly reminded her that Dad had written those provisions himself, that every word came from him, that maybe she should consider what that meant about his true feelings. She hung up on me. My brother sent a series of increasingly threatening text messages about lawyers and criminal charges and how I'd regret this. I forwarded them all to the trustee's office. My sister tried a different approach, calling my wife to cry about family unity and how we could still fix this if I'd just be reasonable. My wife told her that reasonable was what I'd been for 3 years while they plotted against me, and hung up. The worst part was the rest of the extended family. Word spread fast, and suddenly I was receiving calls and messages from cousins, aunts, uncles, all of them with opinions about what I'd done. Some supported me, said my father had clearly seen something they hadn't. Others accused me of being vindictive and cruel. A few tried to mediate, suggesting we could still work something out, share the money more equitably. I politely declined. The trust was structured the way my father wanted, and I wasn't going to undermine that. Update 1. It's been 6 weeks since the meeting. My mother retained a high-powered law firm to contest the trust, burning through a significant portion of her $50,000 payout in the process. Their legal challenge lasted exactly 12 days before her own lawyers advised her to drop it. The language was too tight, the provisions too clear, and every attempt to find a loophole just reinforced how carefully my father had planned for this exact scenario. My siblings tried a different approach. They went public, or as public as wealthy families go. They started telling their version of the story at country clubs and charity events, painting me as a conniving villain who'd manipulated a grieving old man and stolen their inheritance. The story spread through their social circles like wildfire. I lost friends I'd known for years, people who decided I must be the monster they were describing. But something unexpected happened. My father's old business associates started reaching out. Partners and colleagues who'd known him for decades began calling, asking to meet. I agreed, curious about what they wanted. Every single one of them told me some variation of the same story. My father had confided in them over the years about his concerns regarding my mother and siblings. He'd seen how they treated money, how they valued status over substance. He'd watched them pressure me to abandon my principles and join the family business. One old partner told me my father had called him a month before he died, saying he'd updated his trust to protect me, that he was proud I'd chosen my own path. Another showed me a letter my father had written him, expressing worry about what would happen to the family after he was gone. These men had known, or at least suspected, what my father had planned. They'd been waiting to see if it would come to pass. The validation was overwhelming. For 3 years, I questioned myself, wondered if I'd been wrong to step away, if my choices had really been so terrible. Now I had proof that my father understood, that he'd approved, that he'd literally structured his legacy around protecting me from the rest of them. I started the process of taking control of the trust assets. The old lawyer guided me through every step, explaining my responsibilities as the primary beneficiary. The first thing I did was establish a foundation in my father's name, dedicated to environmental protection and community development. I allocated $10 million to it immediately, enough to fund real change in the causes Dad had privately supported, but my mother had always dismissed as wasteful. The second thing I did was reach out to my father's company. My brother had been running it into the ground, prioritizing short-term profits over sustainable growth. I made an offer to buy out the family shares at a fair market price. My mother refused, despite trumping sense. So I waited 3 months and watched the next quarterly report crater. Then I made another offer, lower this time. She accepted. I installed new management, people who shared my father's vision for ethical business practices. Within 6 months, employee satisfaction was up, we'd implemented new environmental standards, and our community reputation had improved dramatically. My brother sent me a furious email saying I'd humiliated him. I didn't respond. Update 2. A year has passed since the brunch that changed everything. I haven't spoken to my mother or siblings since my mother's legal challenge collapsed. My wife and I have settled into our new reality, one with financial security but a fractured family. The foundation has been my primary focus. We've funded renewable energy projects in underserved communities, legal aid for environmental cases, and scholarship programs for students pursuing sustainability careers. Every grant we award, every project we support, I think about my father. This is what he wanted, what he'd been too constrained by family expectations to do himself. Last month, I received a letter from my mother. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered by mail. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing, but she wrote that she'd been thinking about my father lately. She described finding old journals of his, entries where he wrote about his fears for the family, his pride in my independence, his hope that I'd find my own way. She said reading them had given her perspective, though she didn't elaborate. The letter ended with a simple question: did I ever think we could talk again? Just talk, without lawyers or money or trust documents between us. I've read that letter probably 50 times. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure I will. My wife thinks I should at least consider it, that holding on to anger will hurt me more than them. She's probably right. But I also remember that brunch, the looks on their faces, the glee in their voices when they thought they were destroying me. I remember 3 years of manipulation and lies. A letter doesn't erase that. My therapist says I need to process the grief, that I'm mourning not just my father but the family I thought I had. She's right too. Some days I'm fine, proud of what I've built and the impact we're making. Other days I drive past my childhood home, now sold to strangers after my mother downsized, and feel the loss like a physical weight. The trust continues to grow. I've been conservative with the investments, focused on long-term stability rather than aggressive returns. There's enough money to fund the foundation in perpetuity, to ensure my own family's security for generations, and still have significant reserves. My father built something remarkable, and I'm determined to honor that. I ran into my sister a few weeks ago at a mutual friend's wedding. We were both in the wedding party, impossible to avoid each other. She looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. During the reception, she approached me at the bar. She told me congratulations on the foundation, that she'd read about some of our projects in the news. I thanked her. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then she asked if I was happy. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it, really thought about it, and told her honestly that I was proud of the work we were doing, that I felt like I was finally living according to my values. She nodded slowly and said that was good, that maybe that's what mattered. Then she walked away. We didn't speak again for the rest of the evening. I don't know if we'll ever reconcile. Part of me hopes for some Hollywood ending where we all come together and realize family matters more than money. But reality isn't that neat. Sometimes people show you who they really are, and you have to believe them. My mother and siblings showed me they valued money over relationships, status over character, winning over truth. That's not something a letter or an awkward wedding conversation can erase. My father knew this might happen. That's why he built in those protections, why he structured everything so carefully. He knew that his death might reveal cracks in the family foundation, and he wanted to make sure I'd be okay when it did. That knowledge is both comforting and heartbreaking. He saw the future and tried to shield me from it, but he couldn't prevent it entirely. I wake up some mornings and wonder what he'd say about how everything unfolded. Would he be proud that I enforced the trust provisions? Disappointed that the family shattered? Unsurprised by all of it? I'll never know. All I have are his actions, the legal structures he built, the protections he put in place. Those speak louder than any conversation we might have had. The foundation continues to grow and evolve. We're making real differences in communities that need it. That work gives me purpose and direction when the family stuff gets too heavy. It's also attracted attention from other philanthropists, people who respect what we're trying to build. I've formed new connections, found new communities, built a different kind of family through shared values rather than shared blood. My wife is pregnant with our first child. When I found out, my first thought was relief that my father had ensured this child would grow up secure. My second thought was sadness that my child would never meet their grandfather, never know the complicated man who loved deeply but worried constantly. My third thought was determination that I'd raise them with the values my father tried to instill, the ones that ultimately saved me from my own family's dysfunction. I still have my mother's letter in my desk drawer. Some days I think I'll respond, suggest coffee somewhere neutral, see if there's anything worth salvaging. Other days I think silence is its own answer, that some fractures go too deep to repair. Maybe both things are true. Maybe I'll decide next week, or next year, or never. For now, I'm focused on building rather than repairing, on creating something new rather than fixing something broken. The trust did exactly what my father intended. It protected me when I needed protection, rewarded me for staying true to myself, and ensured I'd have the resources to make a real difference in the world. That he saw the need for such protection years before it became necessary tells me everything I need to know about how well he understood his own family. It's a gift and a tragedy all at once, this inheritance of both money and painful clarity. I don't regret enforcing the trust provisions. My family made their choices, and those choices had consequences. My father understood that and planned accordingly. I'm just grateful he loved me enough to see the truth and act on it, even knowing it might tear his family apart after his death. That's the real inheritance. Not the money, but the validation that choosing integrity over convenience was the right path all along. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.